Welcome to the Seize the World podcast. I am your host, Sam Sees, and I am with Erin. How are you, Erin?
I'm good. Hello there.
Now, Erin is a former professional dog trainer.
Yeah, well, you never get to be a former one in all reality. It's one of those jobs you never get to really retire from. Everybody's got questions. But yes, I'm limited today in terms of clients that I already have.
Okay. What do you do now as far as with dogs these days? If you're not dog training, or do you do anything with dogs still, or you want something new?
Yeah, well, so when the pandemic started, it really rearranged dog training in general. And I started to go back to dabbling in my previous life, which was grooming. So I still do the training, but I kind of keep it to the clients. Like I already have a good referral base. And the other thing that was happening to me as a dog trainer was I had gotten the reputation for being very good with working with aggressive dogs. And so veterinarians were constantly sending me aggression cases. And I was certified to do that through Purdue University, to work with veterinarians with behavior modification. But what was happening for me was my caseload was all aggressive dogs. And at that point, it's no more fun. Because you're worried about whether or not the owner will follow through, and if the owner doesn't follow through, then somebody can get hurt. And so, that's where I started to limit, the cases that I would do and things. I can elaborate a little bit more on that. So
Sure, go ahead.
So there was a local person who had a big place, and he was doing dog training, and I was training my dogs there, and he offered me to come on and assist. And over the years that I was doing that, I was apprenticing. And what was happening, those were the years, we're going back almost 30 years, where this was the years of more force training and punishment training. And at that time, there were beginning to be what was called crossover trainers, where there were trainers who were starting to move from punishment training to reward-based training. So I was one of these early crossover trainers where I was learning not to use force, but what happens when you don't use force and what results are you getting. And so what was happening in these classes was so many of the people were realizing that I was kind of switching to reward-based training with the same, even though we were teaching the same lessons, like there were two teachers in the class. And after the class, people were coming more to me to ask, how do I do this without punishing my dog? And that was what hooked me into, and what I saw with my own dogs being punished, that they were getting worse, not better over time, that when you start to punish behaviors, that the dog goes more into either fear or fight. And fear might look good to the owner, that, oh, good, the dog is fearful, so it's going to stop doing what it's doing. But the problem with that is that when the dog goes into fear, the dog stops showing you the signals that it's afraid. It stops showing you maybe the slightly aggressive things that it's going to do. And when it stops showing you, you no longer have the warning that the dog is feeling threatened. And so then the dog stops warning and he goes straight to bite.
Oh, wow. What approach do you make with a dog that doesn't listen?
Okay, so leading in, like that kind of leads right into, okay, so if I'm training this dog and he's not listening and I'm not going to use force or punishment to train him, how do I get him to listen? Right. So every dog is going to be motivated by different things. One of my first rescue dogs, I could motivate him with food. And there are some dogs that are not motivated by food, but his motivation more than anything was a ball, to throw the ball. Okay. And so, what I did was every time I asked him or started to teach him things, I would work with a little bit of treats just to keep him motivated. But then the big jackpot of his behaviors was that we would throw the ball a couple times. So to have a dog that doesn't listen, you want to teach the basic things that the dog will do. Like maybe it's sit, maybe it's give a paw. It doesn't always have to be like down, stay, those types of things. It could be a trick, because the dog doesn't know the difference between a trick and any other command, right? He just knows that he's doing what you've asked him to do.
Right.
And so what I want the dog to find out, once I've taught him a couple commands, whether I'm using treats or balls or tug toys, whatever, then what I do is I show him that by doing that command, he will get all the things he wants. So I take him to the back door to go outside. I do not open the door. I ask him to sit. He doesn't sit. I just turn away for 3 seconds. I go back again. I put my hand on the doorknob. I say, sit. He doesn't sit. I turn away again. And I keep doing that until the dog finally sits. Oh. Now, he probably sits, not because he even heard me, but because he's like, why is this taking so long? And then when he sits, I get to say, what a good dog, what a good dog. Right. And I open the door. When I consistently do things that show him that every time you do what I ask, you get what you want.
Right.
He's going to start to go, oh, I want to figure out what my human wants from me. So that's the beginning of teaching him how to listen.
When you're on this approach, when you're teaching them how to listen, how do you build trust with them at the same time?
I love that question. How do you build trust with a dog? Because that's really the foundation of getting the dog to listen to you, to want to listen to you, right? Yeah. So building trust is first, I think it starts with being dependable, being reliable. It's kind of like just like humans, trust gets built in small things, that you're paying attention to me, that you listen, understand me, kind of things. And the dog can have those same sort of concepts. Not that we want to anthropomorphize a dog, which that means making the dog human, because he doesn't think like a human, right? But there's ways. So just today, for example, my little female, she wanted to come up the steps, but 2 of the other dogs were sitting at the top of the steps, blocking the steps. So she was down there doing a little whine, like, I want to come up, but I can't come up because they're in my way. And so I go over, I move the other dogs, she comes up the steps. Those are tiny little things where the dog sees that you have its interest at heart, and also things where you're going to protect them. So I have a couple dogs here today that one is a young female. She's like maybe 2 years old. And I have a Jack Russell who's like, he's probably about 6 years old. And so she's playing really rough with him. And he loves her. He plays with her, but he's getting tired of it. And so he starts to give her a growl and a warning, stop it. And she doesn't. And so I go in and I move her away. And so he goes, oh, I can trust you, so I don't have to get more aggressive because you will come in and help me. So these are little ways that we build trust. I have an interesting story from, maybe 20 years or so ago. I was in Florida with one of my favorite mentors who's now passed away, but his name was John Rogerson. He's from the UK. He's a great trainer, and he had a week-long workshop for dog trainers to come. And there were probably about 25 or so of us. And we each had a dog during the time from the shelter. So we each had a rescue dog. And our job was to take them through the training course that John had for us, to teach them all these different skills and stuff. And what John said in the beginning was, there's going to be a winner of who's going to make the most progress with the dog here. And I won. I didn't know why I won. The last day when he announced where, I was like, so I went to him and I said, John, what happened? I mean, some of the dogs were learning the same sorts of things, He says, on the very first day I saw you with that dog, and I knew that you built trust with him, or her it was, because what you did was you immediately took the dog you asked the studio if they had a grooming room, which they did. You took the dog to the grooming room, you took it up on the table, and you started to brush it out. You told that dog that it was okay for you to handle it. It was a very fearful dog. You told that dog it was okay for you to be handled, to be trusted, that it got a little bit of play afterwards. And another thing that happened with that dog, which I think is why he moved into thinking I had accomplished the most, was that at one point, we all had our dogs off leash and we were working with the dogs, and a car came in, opened the gate to the training studio, opened the gate, and my dog started to run out the gate because she was fearful. The gate made a lot of noise and she started to run out. And I knew that I could not touch her at that point to get her back. But what I did was I started to call her name, and I moved a little bit towards her, and then I started to run play-like away from her back into the training studio, you know? And so she thought, oh, she's going to play with me. She's not going to chase me, okay? Because being chased would either make her think, well, we're playing a game, and I'm going to run further and further away and into the street. Yeah. But if the chase game is that I'm starting with her to chase me, we already had enough of a relationship for her to realize I want to play with her.
Right.
Okay, and I'm starting to trust her. And so it happens in little things, you know, just like it happens with humans. It happens with little things, you know. That's how you build trust. You might have one big episode, but then the person lets you down in all these other ways. But if you keep showing up, showing the dog that you're reliable, you're dependable, you're going to keep it safe. You know, you're walking in the park and there's another dog coming that's growling and going crazy because it doesn't like dogs, and you move your dog behind you and you just, you know, calm the dog, you know, then dog realizes, oh, you're going to keep me safe from that other dog. All those little things are the things that build trust.
You said so much. Wow. What is the common misconceptions about dogs and dog training?
To think that they think like we do is one common misperception, you know. But I think the biggest misperception that we have is to think that punishing them works. And that's in little things like, you know, the dog is barking, right? And you want to stop the barking and you're yelling at the dog, stop it, shut up. Well, all the dog thinks is that you're barking too. So He thinks, oh, my human's barking with me. Let's keep barking. Right?
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah,
right. Or we're taking a walk in the park and this other dog is coming at us and the other dog is barking and growling. And so my dog starts to bark and growl and I'm grabbing the leash and pulling him back and telling him no, you know. And so he thinks, oh, well, when another dog comes towards me, I act rah, 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 and so does my owner. I must be doing the right thing, right? Yeah. As opposed to, come on over here, let's give you some treats. Another dog's going to go by, and when the dog is gone, there's not going to be any more treats. You know, right. That's the way it starts. But I think the biggest misperception is probably to think that something we can do to punish the dog is going to help him learn, because you know what we know today is that punishment does not teach anything but takes the dog into fear and you know kind of goes underground to fool us into thinking that the dog has learned something, and then down the road we find out that the situation has happened too many times and the dog finally says enough. Right. I'm not giving any more warnings, you know, from there.
Do most dogs usually follow after their owners, or do they have their own personality?
Both.
Yeah. A little bit of both? Okay.
Both. They'll follow after their owners because if they've started to trust their owners, they believe that their owner's doing the right thing. They want to appease their owner. They're, you know, well, if I'm yelling at you when another dog is coming by, you must be doing the right thing by barking at the other dog. Right. And then you have the dog's own personality in that, which is often linked to genetics. It can be linked to so many different things. It can be linked in utero, like one of the things we know about, if you have a litter in utero of, let's say, 5 male dogs and 1 female, that female is going to be bathed in so much of the male hormone that she's going to act like a male dog, right? So, there's so many things that shape the personality of the dog.
Wow. What advice would you give first-time dog owners?
Okay, so socialization is crucial, and it also depends, like, the age that you're getting the dog. Okay, so if you're getting a puppy, a dog has an imprinting period up to approximately 14 to 16 weeks. Okay,
14 to 16 weeks.
14 to 16 weeks. The first advice I would give in terms of getting a puppy is don't get a puppy under 10 weeks. Okay. Because the puppy has so much to learn from its mother and from its litter mates. Okay. And a good breeder is going to want to know her pups enough, his pups enough, to know that they're being matched up with the right owner. Okay. So this socialization that you get to do as the owner, ideally, the breeder has started to do some of that socialization. So I bred West Highland White Terriers. I took a course at Purdue in 2002, and it was a whole course on socialization, how to take a puppy in this imprinting period and really make her a resilient dog later in life by giving it the social exercises that help the brain to be able to tolerate more scary situations. Okay. And they were divided up into 4 different categories of socialization. One was called scary strangers. One was called obstacles. One was called health and handling. And the other one, I always forget one of them. Scary strangers, health and handling, obstacles, and I'm sure I'll remember the other one sooner or later. But while they're in this imprinting period, their brains, because the processes in their brains are not completely sealed off, it's called myelin, every experience that they're having prior to this imprinting period closing is worth like having the experience 3 or 4 times. So their learning is so much more profound. So teaching a dog sit, down, stay in this imprinting period makes them much better to maintain and even learn how to learn later as they go through life. So the socialization things in terms of, let's take health and handling, right? So what we would do is we would put the dogs up on a table. We would have a play doctor's kit, and be listening to their heart and looking in their ears and cleaning their ears and going in their mouth and shoving a treat into their mouth as if it was a pill, doing all these things at the same time, playing with them and having fun so that they're finding out that this isn't a horrible thing, this grooming and all this stuff, that it's actually pleasurable and something that they can like. So we tend to think here in the States that socialization means getting your dog out there and having it be with other dogs. And that's just a part of it. Also, because getting your dogs out there to be with other dogs is making sure that you're teaming them up with the right dogs to be with so that they're not learning the wrong play behaviors, right? So in order to build a more resistant brain, the socialization is the first thing that I would want owners to do, and to do just some mild training so that the dog learns how to learn. Because if he's learned how to learn, you're going to be able to teach him things for the rest of his life. If that answers the question.
Yeah, that's you answered it perfectly. How much time should you spend when you first get a dog? How much time should you be spending with them?
Well, that's a nice question, because it depends on whether or not you have a multi-dog household. Okay.
Sorry to cut you off. The reason why I ask is because I have a friend that's struggling right now. She just got a new dog, and her biggest problem is her work schedule. So, the dog's like tearing things up in the house and, very sad when she comes home because, the dog hasn't spent much time with her, so it doesn't know really what to do. So that was my next question. How much time should you be spending with, your new dog?
How old is the dog and what breed?
That I don't know. I
Okay.
think I know it's like somewhere around 2 months, somewhere around there.
Oh, very young. Okay.
Yeah.
So the age and the breed, certainly factor into that question, because some breeds are going to need a lot more activity and such, and some breeds are going to need different types of attention. Okay. But a 2-month-old dog is going to need a lot of attention. So if it's an 8-hour day being, 8 or 9 hour day being crated, that's definitely too much for a 2-month-old dog, because it also has to be able to relieve itself. So, is this dog being crated? Is it being left in an open space? Those are some things that I would be looking at. But training itself, like sit, stay, down, leave it, give me a paw, roll over. Like I said, it doesn't have to be commands. It can be fun stuff. It can be tricks. Training tires the mind more than going for a walk. Okay, because for an animal, for a dog, that's not the part of the brain that they commonly use, right? And so it's like if you're learning something brand new, or like if I'm doing my taxes, which I hate doing anything mathematical, I'm exhausted in 10 minutes, right? But if I'm doing something I really enjoy doing, I could go on and on and on. And so it's kind of like that for a dog. If he's doing something that's new and different and really challenges his brain, he's going to tire out faster, which is the other advice that I give to new dog owners. Train. But a young dog like that, I would definitely be training a minimum of 20, 30 minutes a day, broken up into 2 or 3 times. Okay. I would, and when I say train, it's not just like treats. I actually teach my clients to train with toys and with play. So that the dog realizes that when I do the command, I get to have something fun. So there I'm building that trust that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Know that if I do this, I get something fun. It's not about getting food over and over again, right? That there's a consequence if I do something, and there's a consequence if I don't. The toy goes away, right? So yeah, I would definitely. So a puppy is going to need a lot more time and attention than an older dog. Also, I would be doing things with. There's a lot of toys out there now, like Kongs and things like that, that you can put your treats in there and freeze them. And so it takes longer and because of all the nipping and the stuff that young puppy's going through with his mouth, he needs things to chew on. So, we need things like that frozen. The more you can freeze something, the better, because that's going to soothe the gums. So he's going to need things like that. He's going to need to get out there and be socialized and walk, and get to what we call go on a sniffari, go sniff all over the place, because that's taking in stuff that's helping the brain get tired. But a young puppy, you're going to need a few hours a day easily. Yeah.
That ties right into my next question. Can an old dog learn new tricks? And what's the difference between training an old dog and a young dog?
Well, the young dog is that if it's still in the imprinting period, then it's much easier typically to train. And if it's learned how to learn, it's going to be easier to train throughout its whole entire life. Okay. So, then the other thing, once you're getting past that, 10-month year mark, is motivation. How do I motivate the dog? An older dog is going to certainly depend on the age of the dog. Okay. Can an old dog learn new tricks? Yes. If you can motivate the dog, if the dog trusts you, if the dog, believes you have its best interest. And in terms of like motivating sometimes with food, like there's the dog that is like, they don't care about food, right? You think they don't care about food. But it sometimes means you just have to find the right treat to start with. And remember, I'm starting with treats, but I'm interspersing, and there's a whole method to it, where you start to intersperse play and life happy consequences so that you're fading out the food. And so you find the right food. One of the ways to find the right food is you can take those deli, you go to the deli and you buy your coleslaw or your potato salad, and it comes in those little plastic containers, right? Yeah. So you get a bunch of plastic containers and you put different treats in each one. And you put a hole in the top. So the dog's going to go around and sniff each one. And the one that he stays with is one that's probably going to be the best motivator for him. And there's some dogs that they rather have the hard kibble, and the other dogs that they only want filet mignon, right? But you tap into what is the motivator for that dog. And like my rescue dog, the ball was more important than any of those things. He would have gone straight for the ball, So you can also do things like that. You can put balls and certain toys down with the food and see, where does your dog go? And that becomes your motivator to teach. Yeah.
That was amazing. My final question before we wrap up, and feel free to yell and curse and be as loud as you want to. How do you feel about cat people?
Well, I probably shouldn't even tell this story. We had a cat when we were young. I always wanted to have a cat, and but we had a cat when we were young, and his name was Soda Pop. And as we all got older, Soda Pop got older and wasn't getting that much attention paid to her. It was a stray that came to our house. Okay. And so the cat was laying there, and I guess it must have probably been a good, 14 years old or something like that. But the cat was laying there and walked by the next day, and the cat was still in that spot, and walked by the next day, and the cat was still in that spot. Walked by the next day and went, there's something wrong with the cat still being in that spot. Right. Yeah, well, the cat, as you might have guessed, was not alive, and nobody noticed it. So that was really bad on our part. I'm very sorry, cat people. But yeah.
I'm much more of a cat person myself. I'm not really an animal person, but if I had to choose, I would choose a cat. I think that for me, cats are just easier to deal with. You know what I mean? My girlfriend wants a dog, but I constantly keep reminding her, who's going to be training this dog? You're going to be at work. I work at night, so the dog's going to be with me all day long. How am I going to sleep? So when I see people with their dogs, and it's just a beautiful thing, like I can tell, dogs help people for, whatever they need help with and all types of things. But my cat, I wouldn't trade him for anything,
I didn't know that about you, Sam. You're a cat person.
Yes. Erin, thank you so much for joining my podcast today. There's so many more things I want to ask you that you can possibly help with dog trainers and dog owners and anything with the dog. So please, if you have any time in the future, I would love for you to come back and we can do this again.
I would just, I would be thrilled to. I love to talk dogs. I would say one thing in closing, that if people are looking for a dog trainer, look for certifications, because in the state of Pennsylvania, anybody can say they're a dog trainer and they don't have to have any schooling, any education whatsoever.
So you have to be certified to be a dog trainer?
You don't.
Oh, okay.
And that is what has really been bad for our profession, because you got anybody out there doing things simply on the basis of what they think is right and not necessarily based in science. When I 30 years ago got into training, people said it'll never make it into the colleges. Dog training behavior will never make it into colleges, and it's all over the colleges now because money goes into dogs and money goes, So, but there are the Certification Council for Pet Dog Trainers, that's CCPDT, where these are trainers who have been tested. And they have to take continuing education credits to maintain that certification. There's the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants. That's the IAABC. So, know that who you're getting is not going to use force because, like I said, it's going to backfire. 9 times out of 10, it backfires unless you have a dog that's just so what we call biddable that he'll take any punishment and not right. He'll just be the eternal victim, which that's not the relationship I would think anybody really wants to have with their dog. So, look for certifications, find out what those certifications mean, and go from there.
Awesome. Would you like to shout out any of your handles? I don't know if you're on Facebook or YouTube or anything.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
People to watch. Okay.
Like today, it's just like I like doing things like this. I like to just carry the message of how to treat your dogs and how they can love you and how to nurse those relationships. And really, my thought is that, the dog gives to you and you have to give back to the dog. You give to the dog has to be giving back to you. And we're responsible for that relationship.
Right. And once these clips in this video go out, you're going to help more people than you know. So, please.
And you too.
Come back. Thank you. Thank you. I'm trying. All right.
Okay.
Erin, thank you so much for joining my podcast today.
All right.
Love you as always. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.